Johnny had stacks of comic books, everything you could possibly imagine, Archie and Little Lulu and everything that I love to read, and there's stacks of them that lined a whole wall in his bedroom. And Johnny had pets. He had dogs and he had cats and he had flying squirrels and he had goldfish in a goldfish pond, and there was always something to do over at Johnny Sessions' house. And on one trip to Valdosta, where we were spending some of our summer vacation, one of the cats had a kittens, and we began this full court press with our parents because we wanted to take one of those kittens home, and we got into please, 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 and no, 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 no. And so that rant went on for 2 full days, and on the 3rd day, Mom rose from the dead and gave up. She said, all right, you can have the cat, but only under one condition. And we said yes. She says, I don't want a cat in our house jumping up on the table and walking around and sharpening its claws on the furniture, so it'll have to be an outside cat. And we said, okay. And so we never really named the cat. We called her Sweetheart. And then it became Sweethearty. And then it became sort of the babyification, Tea-Darty. So we called her Tea-Darty. And Tea-Darty seemed to be okay being an outside cat. You know, there were consequences as a result of being an outside cat because, you know, she had 5 litters of kittens in a row before they figured out what needed to be done about that. And then there was Rex, who was an outside dog, who happened to be a German Shepherd, who met with Tea-Darty, the outside cat, and we ended up taking Tea-Darty to the vet for a few stitches. But she, for the most part, seemed to be okay with being an outside cat until there was really bad weather. And by really bad weather, I mean tropical storm, hurricane force, rain and wind, and sheets of rain hitting the house, and whistling and the howling of the winds. And on one occasion, I remember we were clunched all around in the living room, sitting there with no electricity, and we began to hear the sound of claws on the screen door. And Tea-Darty started climbing up the screen door until she got to this rectangular window, which was about 5 feet up, and her head was on the other side, and she was soaking wet, looking inside at us who were safe and dry. And you couldn't hear her because all of the noise outside was drowning it out, but you could see her mouth going. She was begging and pleading for us to let her in. And as I was struggling with this message, a text from Matthew 8, verse 20 came to mind. And there was a man who came to Jesus, and he said, I want to follow you. And Jesus said, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The British have a term for this. They call it gobsmacked. And what hit me like a ton of bricks was that Jesus was an outside cat. You see things differently from the outside. And so I guess the question for us today as we wrestle with these texts is, what kind of cat are you? It's kind of neat being an inside cat. You know, it's warm and safe. And, you know, we might know all the hymns and all the praise songs and all the creeds. And it's cozy and it's comfortable being an inside cat. And I guess for myself, I'm an inside cat. I was born into a family of inside cats. My grandfather was a Methodist minister, and every Sunday we went to church, And we sat on the third row on the right-hand side, left hand as you walk in, because that's where the preacher's family always sat. So my mother carried that tradition with myself and my two sisters, and that's where you could find us. And that's where easily you could point out where the preacher's kids were, and you could watch what they were doing wrong. And Nanny was this. There were churches that my grandfather served in South Georgia Conference, and they asked him to move, and they asked her to stay because they really liked her but weren't really sure about him. And she died when I was 13. It was devastating to the family, and I look back at it now, and it almost is surreal, the weeping and the wailing that took place. My father, I saw him cry for the first time when his mother-in-law died. Now, how many of you guys truly would die when your mother-in-law, cry when your mother-in-law died? And we quit going to church. Just kind of gave up. And then I sort of became an outside cat. We didn't go back for a long time. In fact, I didn't go back again until I was a senior in high school. And they were giving the seniors Bibles. And so I stood in line in front like these Girl Scouts did getting their awards. We were standing up to get our Bibles. And there was a woman sitting in about the fourth or fifth pew with blue hair. And she turned and whispered in a voice that you could have heard across the county. She said, "He would be such a nice-looking boy if he didn't have that long hair." Sign, sign, everywhere a sign. That's all it took. I won't be around those hypocrites. You know, outside cats are sensitive, and their rejection meter is up to here when they're walking in, and they're looking for anything that's going to tell them that they're not welcome here. I didn't go back for another couple of years, and decided to go on a Sunday evening because it was less formal. At the time, inside cats always had to wear coats and ties to church on Sunday morning. That was the rule. Jesus said it somewhere. But Sunday night was more informal, so we went, and there was maybe 40 or 50 people gathered for worship. And it came time for the pastor to recognize the visitors. And so he pointed to me and said, "Would you please stand and introduce yourself?" And I told him my name, and he said, "Well, we're glad that you're visiting here tonight." And I said, "Well, I'm a member here." And he got down from the pulpit, walked down to where I was sitting, and he shook my hand, and he said, "My name is Reverend Al. I work here." Totally humiliated me. But it didn't matter how hard they tried to keep me out. I forced my way in. By golly, they were going to accept me whether they wanted to or not. So not long after that, I finished my degree at the University of North Florida. I went to the Cattler School of Theology at Emory University, where I learned the theology and art of cat herding. And they sent me to be an associate pastor to serve out my apprenticeship. And I remember the day I was ordained an elder in the United Methodist Church. The next morning I woke up in a cold sweat, because it was then that I realized that I was definitely an inside cat. And it was fun being on the outside because you could criticize it. But what do you do once you're in? I was operating one of the franchises, the Cross and the Flame. They sent me out to pastor those places. So what do we do about the outside cats? Do we have a cat problem? I was in Madison, one of the places I served for 5 years, and it was Easter Sunday, which is the day that a lot of the outside cats come in to see what's going on, and they sniff to get a sense of what it's like. And there was a couple that had a young child, and he dropped his wife off. She went on in the sanctuary, and he took the baby to the nursery, and the nursery attendant said, "I'm sorry, but the nursery's full today, so you can't leave your baby here." And Jesus groaned. And so, not knowing really what to do, if it would be okay to go inside, because the service had already started, and he didn't know what the rules were for the inside cats. He was a little bit intimidated by it, so he put the baby in the car, rode around for an hour until she came out, and then they left. And all the while that she was in the church, worried to death, what's happened to my husband, and is my baby okay? And they never came back. I wonder why. We worship and attend at First Methodist in Ormond. We were going to church. We had a Prius at the time. And parking in the parking lot. The Prius, we love that car. We named it Scooter, which is kind of funny if you think about it, because we named the car and not the cat. And this man walking by, as we parked on the grass in between some asphalt parking spots, because you could put that car in just about any place. It was, the dimensions made that possible. And he looked at me and his lip furled, and he snarled at me and he said, "That's not very eco-friendly." Really? It gets 50 miles to a gallon. What does your ride get? And if you look over there, there are a whole bunch of people parked on the grass. Seems like that's okay. But I didn't really let it bother me, because I'm an inside cat. That's my church. That's where my water bowl is. And there's a pew in there where I sharpen my claws to mark my territory, because by golly, that's my spot. And nobody better not get in it. But what would have happened if that would have been an outside cat who was there for the first time? They probably would have never come again. And so I don't know if it's what we're going to do about these outside cats, because, they're not really like us. Some of them are even feral. They're not as sophisticated as we are. They don't even purr the way that we purr. And some of them have purple hair, and some of them have tattoos. Do we really want those outside cats inside? Maybe it's not that big of a problem anyway, because they're not really breaking down the doors trying to get in. They only seem to be interested at times, maybe perhaps when the weather changes, like it did after September 11th, when they crawled up the screen and they looked inside and said, "Is it safe in there? Can we come in? Do you have something that's going to make us feel better?" And I watch the news, and you watch the news. The bombing of ISIS that started this last week. A nation that's been with the intent of carrying geographically from Iraq into Syria to be a holy Islamic state. The Taliban don't even have anything to do with ISIS, because they're so radical in their implementation of Sharia law, and that they're interested in genocide of anyone who's not of their faith. Surface-to-air missile hits a civilian liner. Time magazine 2 weeks ago said that we are now in Cold War II. Israel and Hamas ceasefire start and stop and start back up again. Maybe if we listen, we might begin to hear the sound of claws on the screen. When I was growing up, my mother used to tell me the same thing that your mother told you, and the same thing that you will tell your children, and your children will tell to their children. It was on a summer afternoon. Whatever it was that captured my attention, I would be running outside and then back in and then back out and back in. And then Mom, in exasperation, would look at me and say, "Are you in or out?" You notice that Jesus invited the insiders in first. And they all had good reason why they couldn't come to the feast. One had a real estate deal that required getting through all of the complications involving these new mortgage regulations, and wasn't sure he was going to get cleared on the loan, but finally they closed on the deal. The second one had just purchased oxen, and he had to go try it out. How do you test drive an ox? And the third one had gotten married, and he was on honeymoon, so you wouldn't expect him to interrupt his honeymoon to come to a feast. They all had good excuses. And then he compelled to go invite all the people that were on the outside to come to the feast. I think he's still doing it. And so for me, I'm an inside cat. But I want to go out there where they are, because I think that's where he is too.